if somebody comes to you and says, we're going to invoke a curse together to see which is true, Christianity or Islam, would you participate in that activity?
No, absolutely not.
Why?
Um, because first of all, the one I mean, you need to view curses in a different sense, right? So if you take the Bible in as its whole, there are definitely a conversation of what curses are, particularly in the book of Deuteronomy, right? There's a blessing on you if you obey the things that God says, and a curse on you if you don't. So what is that curse, and do people have the power to do that curse? So in the Old Testament, curses are tied um, to God, and as a reward for obedience is a blessing, and like a consequence of disobedience is called a curse, right? So the curses, it talks about like if you obey God, He will cause your livestock, right, to not abort their young. He'll cause your fields to bloom and blossom. He'll let you have many offspring. But if you disobey God, you will, the opposite will happen, right? Like you won't have many offspring. Your farms will die. You won't prosper. So in that regard, they're tied to God, right? They're tied to obedience between God. It also says, like, don't do witchcraft, right? Like it's essentially saying don't cast spells. I just followed a really interesting TikToker, and I don't really like not on TikTok a lot, but I liked some of the things she was saying. She said she was in witchcraft for 10 years and then she became a Christian. And she talks about her perspective on some of the things that are popular within Christian, American Christianity, Western Christianity today. And some of the things she says are pretty controversial, right? Because a lot of Christians love, for instance, the Enneagram, and she hates it, you know. Um, so the point is, where is it coming from, and what is the motive, right? Like first of all, for me to be able to sit there and say in your scenario, hey, we're gonna go uh, curse Elon Musk, right? Like we're we believe he's doing awful things. It takes judgment out of the hand of God, right? And it also removes the redemptive element.
Mm-hmm.
It removes the element that a person can turn away from evil and turn towards God and do good. The other thing in the New Testament is talks about woes, right? So Jesus talks about it in the book of Luke, right? It has blessed are you versus woe to you.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is that sorrow comes with disobedience, right? But blessing comes with obedience to God. And he talks like it's in the Luke version of the Sermon on the Mount. So
I have
there's
it up right
you
here.
have it there, yeah,
I say to you, this is Luke 6:27, but I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you.
right. So we know that curses are active. We know that curses are part of the world back then. But within context of the Bible, it's always been tied to, you know, you if you engage in spiritual things like in the name of God or alongside of God that are outside of the will of God, right? Like the written explained will of God, in this instance, the Torah. Um, you know, you will be facing consequences. Also, at the end of the New Testament, right? The very end of the New Testament, the last, couple of verses, it says, cursed is anyone who does not listen to the words of this book, who does not obey the words of this book. It's talking about like, the testimony of all the stuff that happens in Revelation, and then new heaven, new earth, and then you're cursed, right? If you're not obeying. And then it gives a whole list of things of people who are outside of heaven at that point, right? Like idolaters and thieves and fornicators and all kinds of stuff. So, you know, to engage in something like that, right, is to say, um, I'm going to, take God's will out of the picture, and
Yeah.
I'm going to try and inflict God's will on you. You know what I mean?
Yes,
It
yeah,
it,
yeah, yeah.
it
So
doesn't it doesn't make any sense.
so what Romans 12 says, again, is bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Then it says, repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I'll repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink, for by doing so you heap burning coals on his head.
Right.
So the Christian idea of this is that judgment belongs to God, and he will do that when he's good and ready to do that. And what invoking a curse in the name of God would be doing would be trying to manipulate God to bring his perfect judgment forward in time to right here and now.
Right. And there's two things you have to keep in mind. First of all, um, to go a little bit deeper into that, you also have to realize that, how do I put this? The first thing you said is like it's crystal clear, like you're trying to manipulate God. But you have to understand that for us, when we say, what's a curse, right? Like if I were to sit here and say, don't curse somebody, well, then don't say F you to them, don't flip them the middle finger. That's not what they're talking about, right? They're talking about essentially putting a hex, right, on the person, wishing ill, spiritual consequences on that person. And the other thing you have to kind of back out of is all humanity is under a curse, right? Because we have a sin nature, according to scriptures, right? Like we are born in sin, and that sin alienates us from God, right? So it's called the curse of sin. And that's what the whole element of redemption is. Like that's the whole point of everything that God did in the Bible was to walk his creation through the process of redemption from the death and curse of sin into newness of life and resurrection. So, you know, I think it's really interesting because when you go into like, I mean, we were talking about it in the last segment, in Turkey, they'll go like, like they'll spit at you and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like,
Oh, that's common in Pakistan
you know what
too.
I mean? But like, and I've seen it used in some instances like, oh, no, no, it's like a baby. You're trying to ward off the curses. But then when you're really mad at somebody, you'll turn around and do that. You'll say, like it gets confusing, but the point is, I think that like inherent in every culture, right? There's always some version of what it is to denigrate the image of God, right? Like, what is it to make the image of God look like we're made in the image of God, so uh, I'm going to denigrate that in you by putting a curse on you because you're obviously not worthy of it or your behavior is whatever. So and it happens. I mean, you see it in Greece. You see it, in England. Like they use the F word like it's an article. Like the word the. But like here in the States, this is now it's now turning that way. But what does that even mean, right? Like, is the F word even a swear word anymore? I mean, I believe it is, but like
No, it's
it's
common, isn't it?
everywhere now, right? It's everywhere. So are you cursing somebody by using it? Well, I think you are, right?
Without knowing it.
Yeah, well, I think you are, but I also think that there's a difference. You're not like necessarily putting a hex on them as much as you're saying like I hate you.
Yeah, and also I
Which is
will
also bad.
correlate this from Islamic sources that Islam strictly condemns of cursing, and of course, something becomes cultural, right? There's the curse culture is common in Pakistan, and we wouldn't say they use certain words, it's like
Right,
F
right,
you or mom and F your
right.
daughter and all that stuff. But Islam's hadith talked about it, and it says that whoever curses somebody is just like you demolish the Kaaba, right? It is so severe that you have demolished the Kaaba. So it condemns those things. But of course, as you said, you know how it integrates in culture and becomes so integral part of culture, and people not knowing what is the impact of it and still doing it.
I mean, Jesus in Sermon on the Mount, I can't forget what gospel it is. It says like if you call somebody like a blockhead, right?
Raqqa.
Raka, right, or a blockhead, you are in danger of hellfire.
Mm.
So listen, God takes those things seriously, right? Like the problem with words, particularly curse words, is like in language, is they're just lazy. They're lazy language, right? But once you start getting into this idea of using it as a way to like put spiritual harm on somebody, I think it crosses over into another definition, right? It crosses over into something else. I keep thinking about WandaVision. I'm sorry. It's like,
So honestly, it seems to me, it seems like the basic Muslim and Christian position on this is roughly the same, but maybe because of the nature of the Islamic sources, there's a few more places you can kind of like pull from and kind of adapt something to your convenience.
Right. And it's like culturally influenced, isn't it?
Yeah.
Culture takes the existing culture, takes the religion, and then merge it. For example, Islam in Pakistan and India looks not exactly same as Islam in Saudi Arabia and Middle East. So is the Islam in Turkey. So is the Islam in Africa. So that there is a cultural blend, and that's true for Christianity, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, that's true. I think a big difference here, like functionally, is because the Hadith and the Sunnah is like so broad. Like again, both the stuff considered reliable and also the stuff that's considered unreliable. If you want an excuse to do something,
You'll find this.
you'll find a source, right? And now that's not to say that people who profess to be Christians can't also do that. If they can and do that at times, especially once you start to add extra biblical tradition into the mix as well. But if you only have the Bible, it'd be the equivalent of only having the Quran and Sahih al-Bukhari, say, as far as the amount of stuff you're reading. So you have less stuff you can kind of pull from if you're only reading the Bible. Whereas if you're just kind of pulling from, as many fatwas as you want, if you're fatwa shopping, it's easier to kind of find stuff
Yeah.
like that.
right. That happens in Judaism too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not about the particular religion per se.
It happens in every.
It happens everywhere, right? It's not about a particular religion, but it's about the prevalence of human tradition and the prevalence of relying on human religious authorities, instead of going to the sources yourself, right? And if you're doing that, you don't really have a mechanism by testing, okay, what's really from the sources and what isn't.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because in I'd say it's more prevalent. It's more prevalent in Orthodox Judaism, but it's idea that the words that you speak are very powerful. So when somebody curses you, what Paul's talking about, right, is to use the power of that word to turn it into a blessing. So don't utter the curse back, is essentially what he's saying. Um, you know, the like when they talk about like the word of God bringing forth creation, that's how powerful words are, right? There's life in them. There's life and death in the power of the tongue. You'll see things like there's this thing called Lashon Hara, which is the libel, right? It's essentially like slander. So if I hear somebody saying something bad about somebody else, I take that rumor and I spread it and I spread it and I spread it. Those things invite curses. So that's why I say don't do it, right? Like don't engage in gossip, don't engage in backbiting, and then they tie it like to all the senses. So it's not just speaking. There's the ayin hara, which is the evil eye, right? Like what your eye is like lusting after and what it wants and everything else like that. So when Jesus is talking about like plucking your eye out, right, or not saying things. And Paul like reiterating that, or cutting your hand off, right? It's better to cut your hand off than to lose your whole body. He's talking about like where these things come from and the power that they have and how it's all based in what we say. So, for what it's worth, right? I think that is the idea for that comes from the ancient Semitic world, right?
Yeah.
It comes from this idea that words have power and, curses and whatnot also do.
To go back to the opening premise to close here, with the event of the Mubahala, I don't know for sure if the Christians of Najran were genuinely scared or not. But what I will say is if they were Bible-believing Christians, they could not, in good conscience, have engaged in the Mubahala. So if we have anyone in the comment section who wants to try and put a mubahala on us or put a curse on us, you know who you are.
Wow.
You're more than welcome to try that, but we will never curse you back. We'll be praying that you have a long and prosperous life and that God showers all his goodness and mercy on you. So thank you for watching, thank you for commenting, and thank you for listening to Christ and Caliphate. We will be back next time.